live inside a map that tells us where to stand, left or right. That single axis, liberal versus conservative, progressive versus traditionalist, promises clarity, but it more often functions as a cage, inviting us to sort complex beliefs into two tidy piles, and then to treat the other pile as an enemy. The Myth of Left and Right by Verlan Lewis and Hyrum Lewis, 2023, argues that this familiar spectrum is not a neutral analytic tool, but an unstable, socially constructed shorthand. Rather than revealing coherent ideological families, the spectrum bundles unrelated issues, encourages stereotyping, and obscures the actual drivers of political allegiance. Labeling politics along a single line simplifies truth and amplifies tribal instincts. When institutions and citizens rely on that binary, they assume coherence where none exists and judge entire people on a handful of presumed positions. Debate becomes less about competing reasoning and more about policing team membership. The forthcoming sections trace this argument's logic and consequences, how issues are arbitrarily bundled, how those bundles fuel tribal identities and hostility, and what practical alternatives the authors propose for moving toward issue-focused cross-cutting deliberation. The familiar left-right line is a one-dimensional map, a single axis people use to place ideas, parties, and voters. Polls, pundits, and party labels compress complex positions into a shorthand, left here, right there, so that a wide range of policies and preferences can be summed up with a single tag. That shorthand promises clarity and quick judgments, which is why it is so widely used. Verlan Lewis and Hyrum Lewis argue that this axis hides more than it reveals. Issues are rarely bound together by a deep, logical unity. Instead, they are bundled by social forces, party coalitions, cultural signaling, and strategic rhetoric into apparently coherent packages. The result is not a natural taxonomy of beliefs, but a constructed convenience that smooths over contradictions and creates an illusion of ideological consistency. That illusion breaks down under scrutiny. Consider plausible but mismatched pairings. Support for expansive social welfare combined with strong immigration restrictions, or a defense of free markets alongside demands for cultural protectionism. Foreign policy hawkishness, privacy concerns, trade policy, and criminal justice reform all cut across the neat left-right line in ways that the single axis cannot capture. These mixed positions are common, yet they are flattened by the spectrum into misleading stereotypes. The flattening obscures real coalitions and leaves little room for nuanced debate about specific problems and solutions. Group loyalty shapes political belief more than abstract principle. People adopt positions not by assembling a careful philosophy, but by joining social networks that signal which ideas belong together. Over time, those signals harden into identity markers, language, rituals, expected positions, and the moral codes that follow. The left-right line makes those identity signals legible and portable. Once beliefs are bundled into a team, disagreement ceases to be about arguments and becomes a test of membership. Opponents are not merely mistaken, they are traitors, fools, or enemies. Moral certainty replaces curiosity, caricature replaces engagement. That dynamic accelerates effective polarization. When politics functions like a social badge, hostility intensifies, trust erodes, empathy drops, and political differences are experienced as personal threats. Public rhetoric that dehumanizes rivals or casts them as existential dangers normalizes contempt and lowers the barriers to aggression. Recent patterns show how these social processes can translate into danger. Rising partisan hostility, coupled with inflammatory rhetoric and digital amplification, has coincided with a marked uptick in politically motivated attacks and growing public fear that harsh discourse fuels violence. The social theory of ideology the Lewises describe helps explain why rhetorical escalation can so quickly harden into real-world hostility. Abandoning the left-right shorthand begins with a small change in habit. Treat each issue as its own problem rather than as a badge that signals membership. Ask what specific problem a policy aims to solve, what evidence supports it, and what consequences following it would produce. Institutions can reshape incentives. Pollsters and newsrooms should present issue-by-issue breakdowns and comparative scenarios instead of collapsing positions under party labels. Schools, civic groups, and deliberative programs can foreground structured conversations that center evidence, realistic constraints, and concrete proposals. Political organizers and parties can highlight policy specifics and practical implications rather than selling unified catechisms. Individuals matter as well. Practice curiosity over certainty. Request reasons, test assumptions with hypotheticals, and be willing to revise judgments when new evidence arrives. Seek conversations with people chosen for their different problem sets, not their team badges. Reward explanation and complexity rather than applause for simple slogans. There are real, replicable experiments. Citizens' assemblies that focus on concrete policy problems, adversarial collaborations that force rivals to co-author findings, and media pilots that frame issues in comparative, solution-oriented terms. These approaches lower effective heat and expand common ground by changing how questions are posed. Changing norms will take time, but the practical gain is clear. More accurate public understanding, policy responses better matched to real problems, and a politics where disagreement is about reasons and solutions rather than loyalty. The aim is modest but concrete. Move from labels to issues, from tribes to projects, and from caricature to careful judgment.